Hey everyone, a little content warning before this one. We're tackling the MST3K episode on the incredibly strange creatures who stopped living and became mixed up zombies. And that means that over the course of this episode, there's going to be some discussion of transphobia, as well as a little bit of homophobia and a little bit of racism and other such things. Just wanted to give a little heads up about that, just in case you're not in a good place to hear Adam and I talk about that sort of thing. I don't think it gets too heavy, but you never know. Anyway, enjoy the show.
This time we watched Season 8, Episode 12, The Incredibly Strange Creatures Who Stopped Living and Became Mixed Up Zombies.
You've heard of fast zombies, you've heard of slow zombies, get ready for bland zombies.
But first, before we get to that scintillating topic, some follow-up.
Yes, we've got some dissension in the ranks. Dissension, I tell you, from devoted listener Marty, who is excellent. Marty writes in on our Facebook group page thingy thing, quote, "Rarely am I in such dichotomy with you guys. Where to begin? I love Porky's. It's one of Bob Clark's best films. It has a strong anti-Semitism slant to it, which I really appreciate."
But it has a strong anti-Semitism slant.
Well, I mean, my understanding is that the kid who tortures the Jewish kid throughout the whole thing learns his lesson, and they become friends by the end and realizes that, you can get past the terribleness of your youth. That's what when reading up on this, because I haven't seen the movie, that was the understanding that I came across of what happens there. Maybe I know you've seen it. Maybe you remember it differently.
The closest thing, is that like there's this the sense that it's like, oh hey, Jewish kids are all right with us, kind of a thing from the teen cast.
Yeah.
Although I believe there's some pranking afoot.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, yes. I also understand from reading it, although again I haven't seen it, so I could be wrong. But from what I was reading, when the kid who's been bullying the Jewish kid finally stands up to his father and says, "I'm not going to be like you, Dad. I'm not going to be an anti-Semitic bully like you." He says something to the effect of, "If being a man means being like you, I'd rather be queer."
But I'm going to make a man out of you yet, boy.
A man? If being a man means being what you are, I'd rather be queer.
Oh, wow. I don't remember that.
Yeah. Again, this is a quote that I saw when I was reading up on this and trying to understand exactly what the anti-Semitic slant is to the movie. It is there, and it is, not the worst. And some people were saying that, that's a good side of it, but it does a lot of other stuff, let's say, at the same time. Mm-hmm. Anyway, Marty says, you don't usually get that strong a message from a teen sex comedy. But Bob was a great director, mostly lol. Again, I've only seen the Christmas movie story thing, whatever that's called.
Oh, yes.
You're going to shoot your eye out. That's a good movie.
Yes, it is. His other movies, he made he made a handful of incredible movies, and then he made movies that just dare you to watch them. There's no in between. There's no such thing as a mediocre Bob Clark movie.
Right. He goes on, Mario Puzo, I'm never sure how it's pronounced. Mario writing Earthquake doesn't strike me as funny. Maybe I missed the joke.
I don't know. I thought it was pretty funny that Mario Puzo wrote Earthquake. All I could think about, two things came to mind where it's like Mario Puzo wrote Earthquake, and I immediately started laughing. One was the Superman the Motion Picture script that he wrote that was largely rejected for being quite bad.
Oh.
He's still credited in the final product.
Oh, I see.
The person who wrote the film is not credited.
That's interesting, because I was reading up more about this again after the episode went out, after we got this note, and I was like, oh, he wrote Superman 1 and 2, apparently. And I know you like the first Superman movie, at least.
Yeah. They there's enough, because that was originally, Puzo wrote the project where Superman 1 and 2 were just going to be one long movie.
Ah, okay.
So that's why he's credited there, and then the basic structure was kept, hence his credit. But yeah, it was largely like, oh god, this script doesn't work. And then I was thinking of the subplot in the Godfather book about the guy who has too big a penis falling in love with a woman who has too big a vagina.
Oh god!
Yeah.
Wow, classy. I don't know. I must admit, I was mostly laughing because I was enjoying how tickled you were at the idea of Mario Puzo writing Earthquake, which struck me as unexpected too, like coming high off of not Ghostbusters. What's it called?
Godfather. It's also known as not
Brain.
Ghostbusters.
Coming high off the Godfather movies to then write Earthquake, and then be like, "Yep, I'm going to cash it in this big drama of people's lives being endangered. It's going to be great," and it wasn't. Let's see. He continues, a slam on Tony Danza out of nowhere. Wow, he's not that bad. He's quite the stand-up guy in real life. He's a teacher, and he's in Hollywood Nights with a K.
Well, I don't know anything about Tony Danza IRL. I just think he's a very limited actor who only worked on Taxi.
I don't know Hollywood Nights. It's another 80s sex comedy, so I don't know that one. I went back and watched a few clips of Tony Danza acting, and I wasn't terribly impressed, but it does seem like he is basically an all right person, all things considered. So, nothing about him as a person. Just I don't necessarily want to see him act in 12 Angry Men. I don't know. And finally, Marty says, and Vanishing Point, a classic. Watch it. It's a very influential cult film with amazing car stunt work. And then he says, love you guys, which it may well be. That's great. I mean, I didn't know anything about Vanishing Point. Like, car stunt work doesn't really drive me to a film, but it's certainly good if it has it. I'm not going to deny the good car stunt scene.
Yeah, I'll give it a whirl one of these days, especially with like an eye on crazy car stunts, because generally speaking, films of the 60s and 70s is where you have the increase in the love of crazy car stunts, and it's like, well, all right, if it comes from that heyday, I will give it a watch.
And I mean, it feels a little one-sided to read Marty's note and then sort of vehemently disagree with many of its points. When I acknowledge here that that's not fair, but I do think it's important to say that Marty is still awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that you can disagree with people about this sort of thing, and it's fine. So yeah, thank you, Marty, for writing in. Thank you, everybody who listens and disagrees with us. We're still going to think you're wrong about that, but we're not going to hold it against you.
And more importantly, I think we learned a valuable lesson, which is that, everyone who sees Porky sees something different.
Yeah.
Like all great works of art.
Oh, boy. Excellent. All right. Other news is that the Mads have announced their next movie. It's a movie called The Beach Girls and the Monster from 1965.
I'm excited because I have no idea what the hell this movie is.
I don't know either, but all the posters and such look delightful.
Oh, yes.
So I'm super looking forward to this. This seems like the sort of movie they should have done a long time ago. It's a horror and beach party film, which is great. Great combo. You've seen the poster, right?
Oh, yeah, I have.
Yeah, it's people under a tent frolicking, while a giant creature from the Black Lagoon type.
Yeah, it's kind of, he has kind of a tent head as well.
That's also true. There's a nice sort of symmetry in the poster.
Yeah, if Gilman had an unemployable cousin, that's what the monster would look like.
This is the Spike to Gilman's Snoopy.
Yes.
Anyway, that'll be in a few days. Link, as always, in the show notes. We're looking super forward to that. Is there anything else we need to touch upon before we start talking about today's movie?
Well, of interest to listeners of this show who have enjoyed the odd segment of Crypt Keeper or not, I must pimp out the latest episode of a part of our Scaredage, which looks at Tales from the Crypt, the series, and specifically its 1995 spin-off film Demon Knight. We, myself and my co-host Sarah, talk a lot about the series and our favorite episodes and our favorite Crypt Keeper bits while discussing the history of the show before getting to the film. And honestly, it's one of the most fun things I've ever done for podcasting.
Oh, yes. No, excellent. Yes, if you're one of the thousands of listeners we have who specifically listen just for the Crypt Keeper stuff, you're in luck. Do you mention Donald Pleasance on the episode as well?
Yeah, I can't have everything.
Okay, next time. Well, we'll put in a link to the show notes for that. Everybody should go listen to that. It's going to be a lot of fun. And now, this movie. This time we watched Season 8, Episode 12, The Incredibly Strange Creatures Who Stopped Living and Became Mixed Up Zombies. This is the story of Jerry. Jerry has a girlfriend, Angela. Jerry also has a roommate, Harold. One day, the three of them go to the carnival. Eventually, they end up at a fortune teller's. "Ha-ha," says Angela, "let's get our fortunes told. Won't it be fun?" But the fortune teller, Madame Estrella, has bad news. Someone close to Angela will soon die. Then Jerry thinks it would be fun to see a cabaret. The cabaret features a stripper named Carmelita. Carmelita is Estrella's sister, and also has some unusual powers. Carmelita stares into Jerry's eyes and hypnotizes him. Angela thinks Jerry should stop staring at Carmelita so much. She gets angry, and Harold drives her home. But Jerry can't help but stay for the show. Madame Estrella has a man friend named Ortega, and Ortega invites Jerry backstage to meet Carmelita. But, surprise, instead they hypnotize him even further with a big spinning spiral wheel. A hypnotized Jerry goes and murders Marge, an alcoholic dancer at the cabaret. The next day, Jerry remembers nothing of this. He tries to patch things up with Angela, but then she twirls a parasol and he gets hypnotized again and tries to strangle her. Jerry runs away, confused, and seeks out Madame Estrella for answers. Once again, Jerry gets hypnotized, and once again he kills some people. On the third day, Jerry returns to Madame Estrella. She throws acid in his face and opens up the door to a secret room where all her other disfigured zombies are kept. But before she can throw Jerry in there, the zombies escape. They kill Madame Estrella, Carmelita, Ortega, and more. Jerry runs to the beach, and Angela and Harold try to catch up with him and save him. But it's too late, and Jerry dies on the beach, just as Madame Estrella had predicted. Oh, and between all this are a bunch of cabaret acts, which are not very good. Anyway, the end.
Meanwhile, on the Satellite of Love, it's Walkathon season. Mike is tasked with donating to Crow and Tom Servo's two separate groups, Walkathon and Helping Children Through Research and Development. Crow's group is literally called Walkathon, which is an acronym for
Walkers at Large, Kinetically Altruistic Through Hygiene or Knowledge.
Helping Children Through Research and Development, Tom Servo's charity, is one Mike's actually heard of. Until Tom reveals that Helping Children Through Research and Development is itself an acronym for
Hi everyone, let's pitch in and get cracking here in Louisiana doing right, eh? Now then, hateful, rich, overbearing, ugly guys hurt royally every time someone eats a radish, carrot, hors d'oeuvre and never does dishes. Eventually, Victor eats lunch over Peoria mit ein neues Burger Tog.
After the break, the Satellite of Love receives a transmission from Pearl's space minivan. Pearl is taking the space children home to their parents, so Bobo and Brain Guy are tasked with sending them the movie this week. Without Pearl around, the two devolve into hurling both insults and feces at each other. Anywho, the movie is sent despite this. In the second segment, Crow claims to be able to read Mike's aura using Tom Servo's head as a crystal ball. Predictably, this is all a ruse, and the two bots have actually plotted to rob Mike. Mike, having only 50 cents on his person, is more confused by the elaborate theatrics than annoyed at the outright attempt at theft. He gives them the 50 cents out of frustration, and the bots are overjoyed. For segment 3, Tom and Crow are sporting stylish new doos, care of the nanites. The bots encourage Mike to get his hair styled by the microscopic creatures and specifically ask for the nanite Shelly. She gives him a vaguely Marge Simpson-esque hairdo, and Mike gets a communication satellite stuck in his hair. Come segment 4, Crow hires Ortega to cater the break from the movie, but Mike's not having it. In the epilogue, the bots set up a roller coaster ride called the Screaming Lemur. They send Mike on the ride with a steaming hot cup of coffee and, predictably, injure Mike. Back in, space, Pearl Forrester has returned the space children to their incomprehensibly large and powerful parents. Free of the kids, Pearl announces, "Blackjack table, here I come," and she cranks some generic rock music in her space minivan. The end. Well, Chris, this is the episode that made me cry uncle. Are you so grateful now that you've had a chance to see it?
Oh boy. So this is an episode that some people really like, and a lot of people really have qualms with. And I'm curious what exactly it was about this episode that made you give up the ghost, so to speak, to stop watching the show.
That's I felt like I had seen an ugly side of a friend. There are a lot of nasty jokes about the character played by Ray Dennis Steckler's then wife, and they're all transphobic jokes. And even at the time, even as a youngster, I knew this is really ugly. And there's also a joke about Wendy Carlos being trans that I didn't know that about Wendy Carlos at the time, and that's how I found out. And that also felt really ugly and horrible. So I after so many lackluster episodes, there was one that just made me kind of sick. And so I said, no more.
Yeah, understood. That certainly is the thing that's really upsetting about this episode, is that there's quite a lot of transphobic jokes. There are also some of the usual Mike era, bodies are gross and you should be ashamed of your body for no good reason. There is even weirdly a bit of racism in this one, even though there are also a few jokes calling out the film's racism when they, continue to make fun of the roommate's accent for no clear reason. I mean, I feel like the best reading of those making fun of the roommate jokes is that, it's already a film that has terrible, hard to understand audio, and the fact that he's got an accent somehow makes it even harder to understand. But, that's not really where those jokes are going. They're just making fun of this accent that they pretend they can't understand. But yeah, there's a lot of transphobia in it, and it took me a long time to get through this episode. It took me many sittings and then sort of building up the strength to carry on. If you cut out all the problematic stuff, it is, I think, somewhat stronger of a season 8 episode than most of the ones that we've seen so far. There were other jokes in it that I laughed at and enjoyed. I enjoyed most of the skits well enough, or better than most of the season 8 episodes we've seen so far. But, it's not worth it.
Yeah, Chris, I think if you cut out those jokes, you'd have a 20-minute episode.
I know, but it'd be a pretty strong one. I don't know. I guess I get why people like it. And if you're not bothered by transphobia, then, yay for you, I guess. But I don't know what to say.
that's
Yeah. So I don't know. I would definitely, I don't want to watch this episode ever again.
No. I it was, because it's funny. I didn't remember any specific joke other than the overall feeling. I mean, I remembered the Wendy Carlos joke, but I just remembered the overall feeling. And revisiting the episode, I was kind of hoping that it wasn't that bad. That was one or two stray comments, and maybe I overreacted as a youngster. And it's no, it's a dump truck of trans jokes, and it's also weirdly motivated by nothing.
Yeah, I mean, you hate to say that, if the woman actually looked quote unquote mannish, that it would be all right. It still wouldn't, but it would make sense. But they have to really insist that at the very beginning, despite all evidence to the contrary, so to speak, she looks like any woman, even you want to be stereotypical about things. She looks like a stereotypical cis woman. Absolutely. What are they talking about?
Yeah, and that's the thing that is so strange about it, is that it's much like the joke. It may have been in The Leech Woman. It's in one of the early season 8 episodes. Go back and re-listen, and you can find it because we brought it up then too, where an ordinary man knocks on the door and is let in, and Mike's line from the episode is, "Hello, I represent the Transgender Society," as if that in and of itself is a joke. And it's almost as though there was a hat full of topics to make jokes about, and someone kept putting in transgender, and people were more than happy to take them up on it. It's forced. It's really, really forced. And boy, do they make a lot of hay out of it in this episode. And it's weird, and it's again, it's a really ugly side of Best Brains that I didn't think I'd see. And I think 3 years prior to this episode being made, say season 5 or earlier, I don't think you'd see this.
No. Well, what do you think of the movie?
Well, it's pretty terrible.
It's a sort of famously, notoriously one of the worst films of all time, that sort of thing. I felt like it is pretty terrible. It's an interesting movie to do an episode around. And also that even when I wasn't being distracted by the hateful content, that I nevertheless felt like I didn't really get a full sense of the flavor of this movie. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. This episode didn't show off the movie the way that Monster a Go-Go got showed off in that episode. And I feel that's unfortunate because I think this movie deserves that caliber of episode.
Like every Ray Dennis Steckler movie, I'd say it's unique.
Well, maybe we should start talking about Ray Dennis Steckler.
All right.
All right, let's have a little music to soften the blow.
Okay. I have to start I have to start with a line from the commentary track on The Incredibly Strange Creatures Who Stopped Living and Became Mixed Up Zombies. Not from Ray Dennis Steckler, but from one Joe Bob Briggs, who we discussed a few episodes ago. In response to the opening scene, Briggs says, "The reason you know it's a Ray Dennis Steckler movie is that already we don't have the slightest idea what's going on here. Already we have three characters behaving in bizarre ways, and the opening credits haven't rolled yet."
How many Ray Dennis Steckler films have you seen?
I've seen half. Well, if you not including this because I didn't technically see this on its own. I saw it misted. I've seen half of one.
Okay. And I assume that's Ratfinka Boo Boo?
That, I mean, when I found out the legend of Ratfinka Boo Boo, I needed to seek it out, and boy, is it boring.
Oh, man, because that's the one that sounded interesting. Though I can imagine it's also quite boring. All right, who, before we get to that, let's do this a little bit more chronologically. Who the heck was Ray Dennis Steckler?
Okay, well, to answer that question, we have to, raise more questions, And that question becomes, who is Cash Flagg? Who is Sven Christian? Who is Sven Hellstrom? Harry Nixon? Michael J. Rogers? Michelle J. Rogers? Wolfgang Schmidt? Cindy Lou Steckler, R.D. Steckler, Ray Steckler, and Cindy Lou Sutters, on whom more later.
I can't wait. He's credited as Cash Flagg in this movie, which is amazing.
Yes. Do you know how he got that name?
He really loved Fanny Flagg and spent a lot of money to meet her once. I don't know.
It's not as interesting as you would hope. Cash Flagg is such a great name, and finding out its origin story is undeniably disappointing. So, son, I must disappoint. The name Cash Flagg came from his reputation of only accepting cash, never checks.
Oh, and that was a red flag for people?
Yeah, he flagged any checks. Cash Flagg.
Right.
But yeah, Steckler starts off as a totally normal guy growing up in Reading, Pennsylvania. He gets interested in movies when he gets an 8mm camera, and he rallies around neighborhood kids to make a pirate movie and a Western. And despite my bad luck with Ray Dennis Steckler movies being both this episode and a movie I've seen half of, I would totally love to see those movies.
He was a regular Donald Glut, as we talked about a couple episodes ago.
Yes, less prolific, but he did break into the mainstream with such hits as The Incredibly Strange Creatures Who Stopped Living and Became Mixed Up Zombies.
Was that a mainstream film?
We'll say sure. So yes, he grows up. He studies photography in the army, working as a cameraman in Korea. And when he returns home from service, he gets a call from an army buddy saying they need a cameraman for a movie, and that's how he gets his start.
That's great.
Yeah, and he's kind of a lunatic as far as I can tell, or at least was had a certain kind of youthful carelessness that perhaps escaped him as he saw more sunsets than he was going to see, because he was looking back on his life, and he mentioned that he was a grip for Alfred Hitchcock Presents. That was one of his gigs early on.
Right.
And he mentions that he had A-frames. He explains that A-frames are big, heavy A-frames that you clamp on flats. They're 12 inches long with wheels on both sides, and you wheel them around.
Okay.
And he had this flat, and he was instructed to bring it to a set, and he ran with it making race car noises.
Oh.
And he got to a corner and had to like quickly compensate for the fact that he was about to run into Alfred Hitchcock. And so he nearly clipped Hitchcock with a flat.
Oops. That's going to do well for your career.
Yeah. Apparently, as soon as he stopped and put the flat where it was supposed to be, he could see Alfred Hitchcock angrily talking to some guy. And he interrupted them by saying, "Don't say it. I'll go get my card. I know." And punched out and never returned.
Great. So what did he do then?
Well, he ended up finding a home with some old friends of ours. He ended up shacking up with Arch Hall Sr.
Were they lovers?
I mean, they were lovers creatively, and perhaps personally. Who knows? What can be said about a man with as many names as Ray Dennis Steckler? Well, he's probably unknowable.
All right. So he decided that Alfred Hitchcock wasn't good enough. And so he was going to start working with Arch Hall Sr.
You get the sense that perhaps he realized he was not in the Alfred Hitchcock League, but he could very much be in the Arch Hall Sr. League.
So what did he do with Arch Hall Sr.?
Well, he was working camera for EGA, which we failed to mention on our episode on EGA way back in the first year of this podcast. And he's also a stuntman in EGA because he is the party goer who gets tossed in the pool by Richard Kiel.
Oh, that must have been a fun day.
Yeah, that would have been, I mean, I would totally have loved to have been picked up by Richard Kiel if he could manage it and toss me into a pool. That sounds like a lot of fun.
All right. So he was an EGA.
And then he actually makes a movie for Arch Hall Sr. starring Arch Hall Jr. called Wild Guitar.
Wild Guitar. That's another. How many Arch Hall Jr. films are there?
This is one of them. There's a handful.
All right, so yeah, this is not the Choppers and it's not EGA.
No.
Oh, wow, there are a few of them, huh?
Yeah.
All right. Anyway, so this is another one.
Yes, Wild Guitar is reputed to be Cash Flag / Ray Dennis Steckler's best work. And it's certainly said to be Arch Hall Jr.'s best work, benefiting from actual direction as opposed to the admiration of his father.
All right. Well, good. Maybe the two terrible tastes that somehow taste great together.
Yeah, and this is also where we see the birth, the on-screen birth of Cash Flag. Not that we see a great birthing scene; that would be nice. But no, he got to start in acting because he had originally cast a black actor to be the villain in Wild Guitar. But Arch Hall Sr. was worried that Southern audiences wouldn't see a film with a prominent black actor in the promotions. So he had to fire that actor, and he took the part himself.
Huh.
So sort of the sad beginning of Cash Flag. And then we get to this little film. And this was also released by Arch Hall Sr. Studio, Fairway International Pictures.
Oh, good. Thank you. Thank you, Arch Hall.
Yeah.
Senior.
And this is I don't know. On the one hand, this is more imaginative than EGA, but it's also harder to follow.
Yeah, I really couldn't say.
it's hard to it's really hard to evaluate. It's hard to say who did it better. But apparently Arch Hall Sr. put it on a lower half of a double bill of one of his own films, and Steckler was a little offended by that, so he bought back the distribution rights, and he gets involved in another piece of MST3K history because he purchased the rights to The Beast of Yucca Flats and did a roadshow double bill of both movies.
It's good that all these terrible movies were friends.
Yes, and you know what? You say the movie's terrible, but Leonard Maltin disagrees, and he awarded the film 2.5 out of a possible 4 stars.
I also saw, I wasn't able to track it down, but there's a Lester Bangs article, the famous rock critic Lester Bangs wrote an article praising this film. It was sort of praising the pure artistic nihilism of this film that is sort of transcended good or bad. It just is. And that's a beautiful thing, and we should support it. And I need to find that article and read it. It sounds great.
That sounds pretty interesting. Of course, as the 60s roll on, getting back to Ray Dennis Steckler, he hops in on the Batman craze and creates Rat Fink a Boo Boo.
Oh, man, I really want this to be a fun movie to watch.
It's not, or at least the first half really isn't, because I didn't get a chance to see like Rat Fink or a Boo Boo show up.
So from reading about it, I got the idea that it started out as a kind of a normal crime movie, and then halfway through, Ray Dennis Steckler gets bored and decides to make a superhero movie instead.
Yes.
That's great.
I loved reading about it. I was so excited to see it. Then when I finally saw it, it's like, no, it doesn't live up to, like, the joy is in finding out about it. The joy is in finding out there's a movie with that title out there. And I will say, the one time I was overjoyed watching the movie is when you see in all earnestness the credit, just the title pops up, Rat Fink a Boo Boo. That's amazing. The story behind that being that there was a processing error and it was supposed to be Rat Fink and Boo Boo, but Steckler would have to pay to get that change, and he refused to, and he claimed in interviews, he's like, I kind of like the sound of Rat Fink a Boo Boo, so I kept it.
It's better. It's definitely better, if, again, incoherent.
100%.
I've got the poster for the Mexican edition of the film.
Ooh.
And so the Spanish title, again, sort of pointing back to the inspiration for the second half of the film, is Batty y Robbie contra el crimen. So Batty and Robbie, as in Batman and Robin, against the criminal or against crime. I'm not sure, but I wish it were good. Maybe MST3K could do it anyways, or the Mads. Either way.
Yes, I mean it would certainly be fun to see them tackle it. I would love it with jokes, I'm sure, and I wouldn't fall asleep this time. He makes a 1969 film called Body Fever, which is notable only for the part that he gives to one Coleman Francis. It appears that they became buds.
So not Donald Pleasance.
No. Donald Pleasance would not. Donald Pleasance would certainly turn up his nose at the likes of Rat Fink and Boo Boo and the money being offered for such a film.
It looks like after that he spent the 70s making porn.
Yes, this is where we get into the Cindy Lou Sutters era. And I am very excited to read off a few titles. Here's a few favorites. There's Black Garters, and Weekend Cowgirls, and Plato's Retreat West, and my own personal favorite, Sex Rink.
Sex Rink. Oh, man. There must have been so much money available for bad porn that led all of these sort of 50s B movie. I don't know. I guess I'm thinking Ed Wood.
Yeah.
But it's astonishing that this is where so many of them ended up.
Yeah. What do you do when you don't have enough talent for mainstream cinema? You've only ever worked with a couple of $1,000s anyway, and you're still in the entertainment capital of the world, baby. Then you're surrounded by attractive young starlets, and you could very easily make money using what you've learned on such films as Rat Fink a Boo Boo.
Now, by the entertainment capital of the world, you mean Vegas.
Yes, I forgot that he's not in California at this point.
Well, Vegas has some entertainment too, I guess. So that was quite a career. Is there any other things of note to say before we move on?
I thought it was sweet that he did a commentary for the incredibly strange creatures who stopped living and became mixed up zombies before he died. It's not interesting in that he just sort of pleasantly remarks on the movie as it's playing. He'll list the actor's name and say exactly what they're doing on screen and say that they're nice. So I get the sense that at the very least, Ray Dennis Steckler, Cindy Lou Sutters, Cash Flag, and others were all nice.
Hey everybody, it's time for the Shallow 13.
It's time for the Shallow 13. 13 fun-sized facts about today's movie and episode. The incredibly strange creatures who stopped living and became mixed-up zombies. Go, Chris, go!
The Incredibly Strange Creatures Who Stopped Living and Became Mixed Up Zombies is the longest title of any misted movie, except for Roger Corman's The Saga of the Viking Women and Their Voyage to the Waters of the Great Sea Serpent, which we covered back in episode 91.
Originally, according to Ray Dennis Steckler at least, the film was going to be called The Incredibly Strange Creature, or Why I Stopped Living and Became a Mixed Up Zombie. but Columbia Pictures threatened to sue because of its similarity to a certain Stanley Kubrick film. When attempts to contact Columbia failed, Steckler apparently reached out to Stanley Kubrick himself and proposed the film's present title as a compromise. Apparently this was enough and the matter was dropped. Why did Columbia Pictures feel threatened by a $38,000 film? How did Ray Dennis Steckler get Stanley Kubrick's number? Confused? You won't be after this episode of Soap!
That wasn't the only name change the film faced. Once the film started getting a bit of a reputation as a stinker, it was re-released under several different and far less memorable names, including The Incredibly Mixed Up Zombie, Diabolical Dr. Voodoo, and The Teenage Psycho Meets Bloody Mary.
Although no one in front of the camera went on to much of a Hollywood career, several people behind the camera would become very notable indeed. Vilmos Zsigmond, credited here as a camera operator, would go on to great acclaim as a cinematographer, lending his talents to such films as The Deer Hunter, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and The Black Dahlia.
Laszlo Kovacs, the assistant camera, would work on a lot of new wave films in the 70s, including acting as the director of photography for Easy Rider and 5 Easy Pieces.
And our director of photography, Joseph V. Meschelli, would go on to write The 5 C's of Cinematography, which is considered a fundamental book on the topic.
Okay, at Angela's house, Mike notes,
Oh, look, they have a photo of Mother Maybelle Carter.
Who was that?
Maybelle Carter was a member of the original Carter family back in the 20s, the first family of country music. She popularized a form of guitar playing which accentuated the melody in the bass line, sometimes called the Carter Scratch.
As the camera pans along the curtains, decorating Madame Estrella's fortune-telling room, Crow says,
Hello, Polonius. Are you there?
Polonius, of course, is Ophelia's father in Hamlet, who hides behind a tapestry in order to eavesdrop on the prince. Hamlet, hearing Polonius, cries out, "How now? A rat?" stabbing at the tapestry and killing Polonius dead. For more details, watch Season 10, Episode 9, where Mike and the Bots tackle a dreary production of Hamlet, or listen to us cover it back in Episode 17.
When Jerry goes backstage to meet Carmelita, Mike says,
Oh, Carmelita shares a place with Jaco Pastorius.
Jaco Pastorius was an amazing and innovative bass player. If you haven't heard his jazz stuff, you might still have heard his astonishing work on several Joni Mitchell albums, including Hejira. But why does Carmelita's place remind Mike of Jaco? I'm not actually sure, but he did die quite young after a life of drug addiction and mental health problems, so I don't know, is that the joke, Mike?
During Jerry's hallucinatory freakout, as several rows of oddly costumed women appear on stage, Mike says,
See, this is what happens when you admit too many women to the Citadel.
The Citadel is a public military college in South Carolina, and in 1994, a few years before this episode was filmed, Shannon Faulkner successfully sued to be the first woman allowed to attend.
The students at the Citadel launched an all-out campaign to humiliate and discourage her, calling her, among other things, Mrs. Doubtgender. It is not clear that the school did much to censor or stop the students from harassing her. After Shannon's parents received death threats, she dropped out of the college. The following year, 4 more women were admitted into the Citadel. The college has, in the 25 years since then, become significantly more welcoming to female students, though obviously the bar began pretty damn low.
As the first dancer enters to begin the most racist dance number in the movie, Crow says,
Hi, everybody. I'm Dennis James.
Dennis James hosted the first televised telethon, and was the very first TV game show host, with Cash and Carry airing in 1946 on the Dumont Network. He hosted many game shows over his career, including The New Price is Right.
Now once, on The New Price is Right, the contestant was playing that game with the mountain climbing man. You know the one, right? Anyway, Dennis James decided on a lark to call the little mountain climbing man Fritz. And when the contestant lost and the mountain climbing man fell off the mountain, James joked, "There goes Fritz." Which would be totally fine, except Janice Pennington, one of the original models on The Price is Right, had recently lost her husband, Fritz, in a mountain climbing accident. Ruh-roh. Janice ran off stage in tears, and apparently Dennis, who had no idea what he had just done, was very, very apologetic.
And that's time!
Well, as you noticed, early on in the movie, Tom says,
Renée Richards is Wendy Carlos in Glenn or Glenda.
Yeah.
Yeah. But we might as well get a chance to talk about Renée Richards and Wendy Carlos. And Wendy Carlos in particular is amazing.
Yeah.
So let's take advantage of that. Let's turn this terrible situation into a terror-tunity. No. Do you know who Renée Richards is?
No, I have no idea who Renée Richards is.
Renée Richards was best known for being a tennis player back in the 70s. She grew up in New York City. She considered becoming a tennis player, but decided to go to med school instead and became an ophthalmologist, and apparently a very sort of good one. But, still liked to play tennis and would still play. Eventually, she sort of quietly, in 1975, underwent gender reassignment surgery and then moved to California and started life anew. So changed her name and, joined an ophthalmology practice out there and all that. But, tennis playing, it's something you like to do if you like playing tennis. So she started playing women's tennis. And then she was outed by a local TV anchor. And what a delight. What a delight to find out that the local TV anchor who outed her and decided to make her business the world's was Richard Carlson.
Who's Richard Carlson?
The father of Tucker Carlson.
Oh. Womp, womp, womp.
Yep. Runs in the family. So eventually she wanted to play in some tennis opens. This whole thing went to a Supreme Court case in 77, I believe, and it was decided that she should be allowed to play. And she did very poorly in the competition because she was in her 40s at this point, and so she wasn't going to win. And it's interesting, that seems to be sort of part of her sense of why it was perfectly fine for her to ask to play, because she wasn't really going to be a threat. It has since become clear that she's maybe not thinking of trans issues the ways that younger trans people would today. I mean, she's in her 80s, but she sort of understands there to be a binary gender system and that she was on the wrong side of it. And now, she's a woman, but those are sort of the two options. She's not really interested in transness per se, just in being a woman.
Right.
Which is, an understandable position. She seems to sort of understand that what makes sense to her is not necessarily what's going to make sense for everyone, but this is how she understands the world and what has happened to work for her. And she really doesn't try to, stick her toe into those waters. It's just other people make her do that.
Yeah, and understandably, I guess, as a famous trans person, she must get asked that a lot.
Exactly. She's a trans pioneer, and people want her to be perfect. And they want her to be perfect for what they want, right? Which is not necessarily what she wants or how she understands herself, and it can be very difficult to navigate those conversations.
Mm-hmm.
So that's Renée Richards. Wendy Carlos, though, I think you know all too well.
Yeah, Wendy Carlos, I absolutely adore as a composer. I know her mostly as a composer of film, but I also know her as a champion of the Moog.
Yes.
As I think everyone has heard the great album Switched On Bach.
I think so. I was seeing people refer to it as the best-selling classical music album of all time. Which is one of those things where I don't know. I don't know if that's actually true or not, but it was a very popular selling album from the late 60s. It was one of the first albums to really show what synthesizers could do that weren't just sort of experiments in kind of noise or weird 12-tone experimental music that was very pointy to listen to. This was Bach. This is very familiar Bach pieces played in a really engaging manner that people just couldn't get enough of. It reached number 10 on the Billboard charts, that album, which is pretty high.
Yeah. Well, and unexpectedly high for classical music.
Yeah, and it topped the Billboard classical albums charts from 69 to 72, which is a pretty good run.
Yeah. That is solid. And hey, it even won 3 Grammy Awards.
Yeah, no, it's a very good album. It's really enjoyable, as is some of her other work. I mean, unfortunately, a lot of her work is sort of very hard to come by. She doesn't put it on the streaming services.
Oh, man.
Or anything like that. But what I've heard of it has been great. She's done several, as you say, movie soundtracks.
Yeah, that's what I know her best from. She did both A Clockwork Orange and The Shining for Stanley Kubrick, and she did Tron.
Yeah.
And they're wildly different. wildly different scores. So they show off just how much talent and range Carlos had. And they totally dominate the atmosphere of the movie. I mean, the music is so much a character in those three movies, and the music elevates those three movies so much, even though they're all quite good. I mean, obviously Tron's the best of the three, but they're all quite good.
Absolutely. And she also put out an album, which was a version of Peter and the Wolf.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. It might have been a mildly parodic version of it. I'm not 100% sure.
Her Weird Al face.
It literally is Weird Al who's narrating it.
Oh my God.
So, yes, Wendy Carlos in the late 80s did a collab project with Weird Al Yankovic. And I listened to a little bit of it. It's exactly what it says in the tin.
That's cool.
I also cannot recommend highly enough going to Wendy Carlos's website. She's still alive. She's in her 80s. And her website was created in, I want to say 1983. It's very 90s. It's got the very 90s loud background going on. And it's clearly like all handcrafted HTML type stuff. And it's so saucy. It hadn't been updated for a long time, but a biography of her came out not too long ago. And she put a little note, and it was like, basically, the biographer didn't talk to me, didn't talk to anybody I know. This is bullshit. You shouldn't be buying this. But the whole website, her whole website is just overwhelmingly like spiky.
Oh, really?
With these kinds of notes, talking about why some of her CDs are out of her, why you shouldn't buy pirated CDs, how nonsensical everything is that she disagrees with. It's great. I thoroughly recommend poking around that website a little bit.
So it's basically a series of editorials from Wendy Carlos, but also because of the era in which the website was no doubt created, there's probably a link to sign her guest book and perhaps a dancing baby GIF.
Absolutely. Wendy Carlos also sort of not somebody who wants to put their trans lives front and center, right?
Well, I read something about a lawsuit.
Oh, God. The Momus lawsuit?
Yeah. It was such a bizarre thing that I'd never encountered, and I think she was quite right to sue.
Yeah. So Momus, who is a sort of indie guy, indie musician / provocateur type, Momus put out a collection of songs called, what was it, the Little Red Songbook.
Yeah.
And one of the songs was a story about Wendy Carlos going back in time in order to marry herself of her, assigned at birth gender, which is the sort of thing that, like, I sort of get why conceptually maybe you thought that was a good idea, but unfortunately you didn't think any further and think about, oh God, this is a real living person.
Yeah.
And that's just super awkward and maybe not as clever as you think it is. Yeah, that's Momus for you. He's definitely an artist provocateur.
Okay.
Anyway, yeah, so even though they're sort of brought up for a pointless throwaway joke that's mostly hateful and hurtful, it's, they're interesting lives, and absolutely go out and snarf up all the Wendy Carlos music you can, which is very tricky because it's very hard to get a hold of it now. So we've said a few things about this movie, about this episode, about these people who have wrought this terror upon us. Adam, before we leave, do you have just one more thing to say about it?
Well, Chris, you might say I have just one more thing to say about this particular episode, as there is a just one more thing reference, which, as all good people know, is a reference to the long-running TV hit Columbo.
Just one more question, man.
Do you know how many Columbos there are?
There's just the one guy. And his wife.
Oh, yes. And frankly, that could be a figment of his imagination. That could be all lies. We don't know. Columbo's a trickster.
Wasn't there a spin-off show about Mrs. Columbo?
Not only did they have to drop the name Mrs. Columbo from that show, but there is a reference in an episode where it's like, oh, I think I met your wife. Isn't she a policewoman? It's like, no, there's a crazy woman who calls herself Mrs. Columbo, but I've never heard of her.
Oh, right. And it's Kate Mulgrew.
Yes. All the more reason to disassociate yourself.
Okay. So Mrs. Columbo turned out not to have happened. Why are you asking how many episodes of Columbo there were?
Yeah. How many do you think they made?
Fewer than you'd think, because it wasn't a show that ran weekly, right? It was like part of an alternating lineup.
Yeah, it was part of the NBC mystery movie at first, and then it hopped networks and became a series of specials that would air whenevs.
Yeah, so like I it could be quite a lot, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was closer to like 30.
69.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Hells yeah. There are 69 between 1968's Prescription Murder to 2003's Columbo Likes the Nightlife. And believe it or not, Columbo Likes the Nightlife, disappointingly not about Columbo's sex life, but intriguingly does have Columbo wearing a feather boa and going to a rave.
Oh, all right.
Yeah, it's pretty rad.
Does he take ecstasy?
No. Because frankly, when you're Peter Falk, you have enough ecstasy in your system. You are human ecstasy, my friend.
I mean, yeah, everybody loves Columbo, I guess. I don't know. I never watched it much. It was one of those shows that was on, like, I guess my grandmother would watch it or something. And it never quite hooked me, though I certainly didn't hate it or anything. It's just not my thing, but I like knowing about Columbo for sure.
I remember when I was really young, my dad would be like, Columbo. Like he savored the Columbo, and it seemed like everybody who was an adult in my life was like, Columbo was on. And I, as a child, I was like, this isn't a cartoon. So I resisted Columbo for some time. I was like, I'm not watching Columbo. I'm changing A&E when Columbo comes on. And then I finally sat down and watched one, I think when I was about 14, and I totally fell in love with the formula, and I especially fell in love with the performance, and also the great roster of guest stars they would have, some of which were recurring.
I mean, to hear that you liked Columbo a lot in no way surprises me.
Well, it's just actors acting, so it's like that's all I want. I just want to see actors riff on each other. That's so great.
And I'm sure the fact that I'm a little more curious about Mrs. Columbo would also surprise no one.
No. But I went to the IMDb page for Columbo, and as you know, they always have like the top rated episode of a TV show, what the fans consider to be the best one. The top rated episode of Columbo is from season 3. It's called Any Old Port in a Storm, and it stars, you guessed it, Donald Pleasance.
Hey, he made it in after all.
He's considered the best, and understandably so. In fact, Peter Falk wrote about working with Pleasance. He said, and I quote, "A joyous experience with a brilliant actor working with Pleasance. That's heaven. One of my all-time favorite guest stars. Playing a murderer, his spontaneous childlike glee at Columbo's ability to identify a particular Cabernet, that moment is burned in my memory."
All right. Well, if you only watch one Columbo episode, you know which one to watch.
Oh my God, yes, it goes without saying. And if you only watch one Mrs. Columbo, watch the one where she goes to get self-defense classes, because the self-defense instructor is, you guessed it, Donald Pleasance.
All right, we're done. If you've been affected by the issues on this show, if Donald Pleasance ever taught you self-defense, or if you'd like to ask us anything, get in touch with us. Our website is itsjustashow.com, and we're on Twitter at itisjustashow. We'd love to hear from you. This show is made possible by listeners like you. For as little as $1 an episode, you can help us research and record this show, and you can listen to all our superfan bonus bits. Find out more at itsjustashow.com/Patreon or patreon.com/itsjustashow. And thank you to all our devoted listeners who support us. And if you want to follow up on anything that was mentioned today, you'll find links in our show notes at itsjustashow.com/episode/98. Well, that was a lot about the incredibly strange adventures of the sagas of the women who went to the sea serpent and stopped living and became mixed up zombies. What are we doing next?
Well, I think we're going to go with something equally notorious, but far less mixed up. We are going to find out that indeed everyone gives two fucks for Bella when we look at Bride of the Monster with the short Hired Part 1.
Yay! I like this episode.
I adore this episode. This is going to be so much fun.
Oh, and Hired is great too.
Yeah, Hired 1. Electric Boogaloo. This is going to be so much fun.
Super looking forward to it. Fantastic. But until then,
it's easy to say Ortega. It's much harder to say goodbye.
Gamera says trans rights. Take it away, Theme Squad. Dissension, I tell you.